The song you hear in the background was written by our special guest today, Mr. Charlie Midnight. He wrote Living in America for James Brown and worked with hundreds of other well-known performers in the music business. Hello, Charlie. How are you?
Very good, Lee. How you doing? How you
doing? Good. Oh, we're holding up, but we're missing playing outside. You know, it's getting to be strange out there.
It's hard, and you know where I am in the Los Angeles area, it's really going off the charts.
Yeah.
Because they just shut down the state again. You know?
Oh my goodness.
Well, because they have to stop this thing. You know.
Yeah.
So
we're having problems here in New Jersey because the beaches are so crowded, and it's just amazing that people are just ignoring the social distancing and wearing a mask, etc.
Yeah, I mean, this whole thing about, you know, not taking away my freedom. I said, well, then don't wear a seatbelt. You know,
right.
You know, there are a lot of rules that exist, and this is the easiest one that ever existed.
That's right.
So
that's right.
I don't know. I just keep my fingers crossed that somehow it gets under control, and that my friends and everybody I know, they're trying to stay safe, and they're staying safe right now. And you know, all my friends over where you are, and what can I say? Just keep our fingers crossed.
Exactly. Well, let's get into a little bit of your musical background first before we get into baseball. And that's quite a resume that you have, that's for sure.
Thank you.
Well, let's start off with going way back. I know you played in bands in the 70s, early 80s, etc.
Yeah.
And then you happened to partner with somebody, the late Dan Hartman.
I did. Well, what happened was I paid my dues 10 years in the worst dives in Brooklyn, doing 40 on and 20 off, 6 sets a night. Moved to Manhattan and put together bands, and I got fortunate to get a record deal in the days when you can get a record deal by performing. You know, Max's Kansas City, you know,
sure. All those clubs, right?
CBGBs. And my record was fabulously unsuccessful. And but I was very fortunate that Dan Hartman was sent my record, although he never bought it. He did listen to it, and he called me up one day and said, "Let's do some writing. I'm looking for a writing partner." And I said, "Well, considering I'm doing the graveyard shift as a proofreader, they're not giving me another record deal. Yeah, let's try this." And I actually was not completely aware of I was aware of the songs, but I wasn't aware of who Dan Hartman specifically was, because I was not, you know, the disco stuff, I wasn't that familiar with who did it. And I think it was my good friend Mark Swirsky who said to me, who we both know very well.
Right, we had him as a guest earlier. Episodes ago.
And he's the one that explained to me who Dan Hartman was. And so I got back to him, and we started, writing and had some fairly quick success. And we were supposed to do, he was supposed to produce my next album. Well, that never got done because the first one was such a miserable experience going through the record company, that suddenly, oh, this is really good. I go out to Connecticut, we write some songs, I make some money. It's not a bad life, you know.
Oh, sure.
And everything since then. He got me into producing when I didn't know anything about it, and he explained to me, you know, songs, get a good engineer, and I've just been incredibly fortunate, and I do owe Dan Hartman basically my career. May he rest in peace.
Yes, exactly. I mean, there's probably not a venue or a store or the radio, especially when you don't hear Dan Hartman on the radio.
Yeah,
I mean, it's amazing, you know, how longevity he had with just a few songs. That's for sure.
Well,
but, you know, we know him as also a member of the Edgar Winter Band too.
Edgar Winter Band. That's where he started. He wrote and sang "Free Ride."
Right, exactly.
A lot of people are not aware of. And he did say to me that nobody's ever played the riff right. That he's heard it. But he was a complete genius, and whoever he worked with was completely in awe of what he could do. And you know, he worked with the best, and he produced Tina Turner. And yeah, I mean, you know, he was the angel that came along and lifted me out of my proofreading career, which I actually loved. I like proofreading, but you know, yeah. Writing songs is better.
How did the song "Living in America" come about?
That was interesting because it was only a couple of years after we started working together, and the Rocky IV, the music supervisor at the time, Robin Garb, wanted to not use Survivor for the second, you know, for this, and suggested James Brown to Stallone, who said fine. And he was a big fan of Dan Hartman's and some of the work we had started doing. And he called us up and said, would you like to write this song for James Brown? And which we were surprised because, you know, James Brown is a genius and usually writes his own songs, but they felt they needed something. He hadn't been on the charts in a long time, and they thought they needed something a little bit more, let's say, current. And Dan Hartman, certainly as far as his R&B chops, you know, were unimpeachable. And, you know, and yeah, we said, sure, let's do it. And we went out to LA to meet Sylvester Stallone, who was the nicest guy. And, you know, he was on the set. And then we went into his trailer to talk about it. And basically what he said was, you know, you guys are the songwriters. This is going to be the scene. Just write it, because he really loved songwriters and he really did not interfere at all. And Dan Hartman and I stayed in LA, and I was staying at this, temporarily at this apartment house behind what was the old Spagos.
Mm-hmm. Sure, yeah.
Sunset. And sitting at the pool, you know, I just wrote a lyric, because Dan always liked to have the lyric first. It was like a Elton John, Bernie Taupin thing.
Right.
And, you know, and Dan came down to the pool. He was staying up at Neil Sedaka's apartment all the way up on the hill. And we sat and we wrote it. Stallone liked it. And that was it. James Brown came into the studio. I was very, very nervous. But then, you know, he hadn't really studied the song. And so I had to write out all of the lyrics and put them on the piano while James Brown looked at them and sang in the recording part of the studio. And I stood there with him going over the lyrics. And I remember thinking to myself, and I told this story often, that I remember thinking, you know, working with a lot of people, I was standing there thinking to myself, if only the guys in the old neighborhood could see me now. You know, from Bensonhurst. And
right.
You know, it was just an amazing experience. And then he, very interestingly, he spilled some coffee on the chorus lyrics. And then I thought to myself, that's art now with the coffee stains on it.
Right.
So I had him sign it, and he wrote some beautiful words for me, and it's hanging up in my house. And that's how it happened. And then we went to Vegas. Stallone asked us to come there because, you know, to work with James Brown. And you had to call him Mr. Brown.
Right. Yes, I know.
If you didn't call him Mr. Brown, you were in trouble. Not when we were in the studio, because subsequently we did a whole album with him, you know. Right. And once we're in the studio in a relaxed situation, you could call him James, but not in front of people. It was a matter of respect. Right. So it was the Las Vegas experience was crazy, but what can I say? It's a high point of everything to have been able to do that.
I had one instance, and this is kind of a strange situation. My grandmother lived in Lakewood, New Jersey. Small house, small neighborhood. And one day after, you know, she's been in there, she and my grandfather, about a month or so, up pulls this huge tour bus next door. Turned out the next door neighbor was James Brown's bus driver.
Whoa.
So I saw that bus at least once a month when I went to visit.
That's awesome.
It had Georgia plates that said Godfather. And it was amazing. I mean, a big sign on the side of it, like they did back in the old days, you know, the touring buses, you know, Godfather of Soul on tour, etc. James Brown. It was amazing to see that bus, you know, every once in a while.
Well, you know, you get very, you know, I've been doing this a long time, and, you know, I know you have a lot of experience working with music. And, you know, a lot of amazing artists pass through our lives. And I think James Brown is probably in the top 3 most influential artists in the history of our era of pop music.
Right, exactly.
And even so far, you know, Uptown Funk without James Brown, there'd be no Uptown Funk.
Sure.
And I think everybody acknowledges that. So it really was, you know, although when he came into the studio with an entourage, at first I was nervous. But, you know, when you got to do the job, you got to do the job. You can't be nervous the whole time.
Sure, yeah.
And
Right.
of course, Dan Hartman was at the controls. And when Dan Hartman is at the controls, probably the best ears in the business, just a total genius. So it sort of relaxes you when Dan Hartman is in there with you.
Right.
So, yeah, so what can I say? You know, there's nothing else to say, but it was.
And you won a Grammy for that one, didn't you?
Yes, and it was James Brown's second most highest charting song in his career.
Wow.
Which is really my.
So who are some of the other people that you've worked with?
Wow, I mean, I've written and worked with the Doobie Brothers. I produced 2 albums for the Doobie Brothers. I wrote with Tommy Johnson and Eddie Schwartz, I wrote a hit song, their comeback hit song called The Doctor, which, you know, sounded a little, you know, bit like old school Doobie Brothers, and I think that's why he was successful. You know, I've written for artists like Barbra Streisand, Cher, you know, Billy Joel. I mean, I've been really, really fortunate to the people.
Yeah, the list goes on and on. I took a look at it before we came on. And
I'll tell you, one of the most interesting things was writing for this song for Billy Joel in this Disney animated feature called Oliver and Company. So he played Dodger, and they actually used some of my lyrics in the script.
oh, okay.
So that was pretty great. But it was really, this was the day, before digital. It was
Sure.
still, you know, everything was still done by hand, and it turned to digital pretty quickly. But we went out to LA to, you know, to talk to the director, and it was really fascinating because he had storyboard all around the room on all the walls, and then he took us around to give us an idea of what the feature was going to be like, and then he started talking in the voice of all of the characters.
No kidding. Wow.
Yeah, it was like psychedelic, but it was just I don't know, these things. It's you know, they come to you, and you're always if you lose your sense of wonder that you're actually able to be involved in these type of situations, then you become too jaded, because it's really, you know, an amazing trip to be on. And, you know, then suddenly I was writing for Barbra Streisand to duet with Barbara and Bocelli, you know, so, and Cher, and it's just, you know, it's just one of these. Joe Cocker, of course, which, you know, I produced a couple of
right.
Joe Cocker albums.
Trust me.
The Unchain My Heart album, which actually brought him back. And that was crazy, because that was really the first serious thing I ever produced. And I know a lot of people that go to school to learn producing would hate to know this, but really, I basically still knew next to nothing, except that I knew how to rehearse a band, and I knew what songs were, what good songs were, and that was the confidence I got from Dan Hartman. He said, "Get yourself a good engineer," and I was really nervous. But Michael Lang, who put on Woodstock,
That's right.
the curly-headed motorcycle riding guy, always talking cool, in the Woodstock film, and he took a chance on me, which was bizarre.
Right.
But Michael's that type of guy. So all these things happen, and when I guess the door opens, you got to walk through it. But
Sure.
I wasn't that experienced when I started. But all these years later, hopefully, I know somewhat of what I'm doing. But back then, it was more like, okay, I know how to rehearse a band. I know what things should sound like. Now I'm going to keep my fingers crossed and get in there. And I was lucky because I was able to hire all these young, great musicians for these sessions. T.M. Stevens, David Beal, Jeff Levine, all these amazing musicians who, when you hire great, great musicians, the production becomes, what you dreamed music should be like, because they're also, the ideas come in, in waves from these people, and
Sure.
your job is just to sort of put it all together. So I was very fortunate. But working with Joe was like, may he rest in peace, was an amazing gentleman, and a complete pleasure, every step of the way to work with.
Let's get to baseball. You're from Brooklyn.
It's less about baseball these days than I do than I do about music. But yeah, hit me.
You're from Brooklyn originally, right?
Yes, I am.
Bensonhurst.
From Bensonhurst, one of the real Brooklyns.
Yes, right.
Not like right across the bridge, which is
Right, exactly.
Brooklyn to us. Yeah.
Which high school did you go to?
Lafayette.
Okay, and there were some famous people from Lafayette.
Sandy Koufax.
I'll tell you a funny story. I was in my lawyer's office back in the early 80s, and his client is Don Kirshner, who went to Lafayette.
Lafayette, that's exactly
and
right.
He played on the team with Sandy Koufax.
Yeah.
Now, at the time, I wanted to talk music. He wanted to talk baseball. So I was asking him questions about how he formed the Monkees, and he also did Kansas as a test tube band. All he wanted to do, because he found out I worked for the Cubs, all he wanted to do was to talk about baseball.
No,
he signed with the Brooklyn Dodgers and played in the minors for a while too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, amazing.
I didn't know that, but I did know he was from. When you're from these places, you sort of remember. They tell you who the famous people were, but Sandy Koufax was our shining star. That Sandy Koufax from Lafayette, and a school which doesn't exist anymore. They closed it down. It got very violent, and they turned it into, I think, a trade school right now. But I went to Lafayette. I hated every day that I ever went to school. In any school I was ever in. But yeah, I mean, it was very different days. There was no coddling of kids. I think there were 5,000 kids in my school. So it's every day you went out into the schoolyard, and it was the survival of the fittest, and so you learn how to be, how not to whine and just do what you got to do.
Sure, right, exactly. There's some great stories about Sandy. In fact, from what I was reading one time, he was almost drafted by the Chicago Cubs. And it turns out that he was asking for a little bit too much money. Back then, 15,000 was like $1 million today. He was asking for 15. The Cubs were offering 12,000. And then the Dodgers came up with 16, and he signed with the Dodgers.
Well, what's interesting is that, I mean, that because I was into baseball very, very much in my younger days. And I remember when Koufax and Drysdale joined together to hold out.
Right, yes.
I think it was $100,000, and everybody was going, they're greedy. These guys, they want all that money. Yeah. My question is, do you think these guys ever regret? Because today it's like $30 million a year, and it's like, and some of them had to become, greeters in Las Vegas.
Sure, yeah. And Drysdale had a great career as a broadcaster too. He was really good in the booth.
Yeah, and he was. Sandy
was quiet. Sandy always is quiet.
Sandy, and you know, I remember we were very sad when he retired, but he retired young because I guess his arm was.
Yeah, he had an elbow problem, which today would have been corrected with surgery.
Yeah, but you know, for me, and I have to say this, and maybe it's from the days I come from when I was very much into baseball. I still follow it on the sports pages, but I'm not an avid baseball watcher right now, although I am interested in this new season, which is going to be what, 60 games?
60 games, right.
I mean, that's crazy. There's no chance for error. You got to come out firing, right? Or else, you know, you're gone. But you know, it's very hard to measure. To me, Koufax will always be the greatest pitcher ever. But it's very hard to measure one era against the other because there's no complete games anymore.
Sure, yeah. And this is the time they pitched to the end.
Yeah, so I mean, if somebody like Koufax had pitched in an era when they could fix his elbow, or when he could have a closer come in when things got rough, who knows, you know? But yeah, baseball's a great game. You know, I just lost interest in following it closely in the steroid era, because, you know, I was very excited when 70 homers were being hit, 71 homers, 60-something homers. And then suddenly the steroid, you know, came out about the steroids. And to me, baseball probably is so much about statistics. You know, that, you know, when Roger Maris was, you know, had to have an asterisk next to his 60.
Yeah, right, exactly, sure. Yeah.
Right, you know, and you know, it's so much better. And I was really, really disappointed because I was excited about all those homers being hit. And then when suddenly all of that was divulged and came out, I said, you know, it's very hard for me because I don't take it seriously anymore. Although, you know, I do read the papers, and in the I'll follow a World Series, or if a player is having an amazing year, I'll read up about that. So I have that much interest, but I really have no rooting interest in the team anymore.
Not even in the Dodgers?
You know what? I won't. Well, first of all, supposedly the Dodgers got robbed, right?
Yes, right.
I mean, which is, I'm not a Dodgers fan anymore, or I was, but that's got to be, you know, for people that are avid fans, that's got to be like ripping your heart out, because we care so much about the sports teams. You know, for me, if there's a player who's considered absolutely great, I'll follow that player. You know, to me, because it's all about greatness. Because it's very hard for me to follow a team. If there's a player that's having an amazing year, I'll start following that player.
You know, there's been some TV shows on the Major League Baseball Network about announcers. And one of them was, there was a great show on Vince Scully. And to me, one of the greatest announcers ever, that's for sure, because it's amazing his knowledge, first of all, and secondly, he worked alone without anybody else in the booth. It was amazing to hear a game being called by Vince Scully.
Yeah, it's an amazing skill. I mean, it's really, first of all, it's hard to be that sharp with the knowledge you have to have. Look, you know, if I get to watch baseball, I enjoy it. It's so great. It's just that I you know, and sometimes, you know, I'll say, oh, who made the Hall of Fame this year? And I'll see it, and I don't even recognize some of those names.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, it's the steroid era that
killed it for you.
It didn't kill the whole thing, but it killed the avid interest, because for me it was all about. I remember when I was a kid, you know, I used to argue with my friend, who's better, Juan Marichal or Sandy Koufax, you know, and it was one of these, you know, ongoing arguments that we had. And to me, it was no contest, although Marichal was a great pitcher, you know. But I used to follow it. I used to follow the statistics. I used to make pages up of who's doing good, who's doing bad, like all of us did. You know, it was like it was amazing. You know, and it's you know, but it's like, and no one's, if anybody's going to hit 70 homers, I'm not even sure that it's humanly possible.
Right.
Okay? Because it's been sinking to the level where it should be. Somebody can get to 50. Somebody can even hit 350, right? You know, but you know, or for a while look like they're going to hit 400. You know,
they might be able to. Playing only 60 games, you might see a 400.
Yeah, and of course, because the analytics have gone to a point where the training, I mean, you know, when they talk about, you know, Babe Ruth, you know, being, let's say, being the greatest player, but, you know, coming to the ballpark drunk. You know, it's one of those great, who knows if it's just an urban legend, but, you know, athletes today their physical conditioning is on a whole other level.
Our thanks to Charlie Midnight, Grammy Award-winning songwriter and producer, for spending some time with us today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you all next week.